morning, and welcome to Backchannel. It's the 22nd, no, it's the 18th. Such a good start. It's the 18th of December. No, rewind. Good morning. Welcome to Backchannel. It's the 18th of January, 2022. I'm Anthony Davis. This is the Anthony Davis Show. And it's nice that you're spending your morning with us. We have lots to talk about this morning, and we're going to dive straight in. You're welcome to be involved. You can send messages via backchannel.tv. You can also send messages just by talking to your Echo show. Just wake it up, then say, and then your message. And you're also very welcome to follow the show on YouTube. If you don't have an Echo show and you want to see the pictures, see this beautiful face live, then be my guest. All you have to do is go to YouTube, search for Anthony Davis Backchannel, and you'll find it right there. Because Backchannel, as you know, is the only place where you can listen to, watch, and chat with hosts of live shows right here on your device. We're going to take a look at the morning papers in just a moment. First, though, let's talk about what we're going to be discussing today, including the Texas primary will be Progressive's 2022 testing ground. We'll take a look at that in more detail. It's also been a couple of days since Donald Trump's Arizona rally. We'll look at the reflections of various political writers, including the Daily Beast's Matt Lewis, who reckons Trump's Arizona speech proves his shock comic act has jumped the shark. And Rolling Stone journalist Anakin Tapp lays out the argument that climate change policies have become front and center for companies, not only because of ethics and reputation, but also because their employees demand it. So we'll look at what she says. And then finally, on this day in 1911, American aviator Eugene Ely performs his first successful takeoff and landing from a ship in San Francisco. We'll discover more about the daredevil pilot in just a little while. Delphia has joined us this morning. Good morning. Thank you for joining us from Ohio. It's your first time, and you're very welcome to spend as much time as you like with us. I can't see you, but you can see me. You can just wake up your device, say the word say, and then your message. And we can, spend a bit of time together this morning. Okay, let's jump straight into the morning newspapers. And Delphia, we'll find a newspaper from Ohio if you'd like us to. We'll do a little review of that, see what's happening where you are. First, the Bradenton Herald, which kind of covers parts of Florida. They lead this morning with Florida will receive millions for bridge repair under new law. That's right, $245 million to repair and improve its bridges over 5 years under President Joe Biden's bipartisan infrastructure law. Governor Ron DeSantis, he has basically rejected anything and everything from Joe Biden, but happy to take the money for infrastructure. Funny that. A Florida family raising 15 kids is gifted a 13-bedroom property. A gift of a lifetime. Left a Fort Myers family stunned and full of gratitude. I'm speechless, Scott Hamilton said after he and his wife, Cherry, found out that the house they'd been renting for 4 years will now be theirs. I'm amazed how the Lord has worked this whole situation. I'm happy for the kids too, because they'll always have this, he said. I don't think it was necessarily the Lord that donated it. I'd be interested to know. It was several anonymous donors. There you go. Dan Oberski and his family coordinated the effort to renovate the house in 2017. They returned December 30th to surprise the Hamiltons with the deeds to the house. From start to finish, the project cost about $400,000, and close to 65 people contributed money or volunteered during the renovation. Wonderful. So the mortgage is paid off, and the $1,000 a month that they were spending on rent can now go to care for their 15 children. Because, of course, why stop at 1 or even 2 when you can have 15? So let's have a little look further down this newspaper. Bradenton wants new limits on short-term rentals like Airbnb. Yes, big changes could be on the way for short-term rental offerings in Bradenton, as city leaders consider implementing new rules and regulations meant to protect guests and neighbors. Short-term rentals, such as Airbnb, allow visitors to rent a home for less than 6 months, but the Bradenton City Council says it's received numerous complaints about guests who disrupt neighborhoods with noise and parking and occupancy violations. Well, they've done that here, I think, in California. They've changed licensing laws now, and you have to be licensed and pay the local authority for a license. It's kind of interesting. All right, what's next? The Miami Herald, which I'm always a fan of. They lead this morning with a photograph of some boys banging drums, honoring Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It says members of the Argonaria Pascal Olinda Elementary School marching band drum section rehearsing before the 45th annual Dr. Martin Luther King Parade, which traveled westbound on Northwest 54th Street, starting at 12th Avenue on Monday. Miami Avenue. So that's kind of fun, isn't it? There's been lots of interesting and rather wonderful celebrations and commemorations for Martin Luther King Jr. How Marvelous Mrs. Goldfarb turned Publix and Mark Cuban onto vegan deli. What am I even reading here? Oh, it's a show from Amazon Prime, The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, about a housewife turned stand-up comic. It said it needs a sequel set in the vegan food world. Let us introduce you to The Marvelous Mrs. Goldfarb. It's a play on words. So the plucky Jenny Goldfarb parlayed her Shark Tank victory in 2019 to now doubling her retail footprint by expanding her Mrs. Goldfarb's Unreal Deli vegan plant-based corned beef, turkey and steak line of products to nearly every Publix supermarket in the southeastern US in January, according to the Lakeland-based grocer. The great-granddaughter to New York delicatessen owner Goldfarb, who spent her formative years in Miami, hit on the idea of vegan deli meats about 4 years ago in Los Angeles, when she decided to go vegan after becoming disenchanted with the animal agricultural world. She said, I approached my very meat and potatoes husband. That's not a nice way to refer to your husband. We're going to go vegan. He said to me, what are you talking about? You're not that great of a regular cook. What's going to happen now? I said, I don't know, but I'm going to figure it out. So 39-year-old Goldfarb said in a telephone interview that continues on page 5. Well, I have actually had a kind of plant-based pastrami in a delicatessen, and it wasn't very nice. So I think hers looks like, that photograph that there is on the front of the Miami Herald is genuinely her sandwich, then it looks more like pastrami than the stuff I had. The stuff I had was grey. Yeah, that show. Well, corned beef is pastrami in America. I mean, they call it a slightly different name, but it's all basically the same thing. So that's kind of fun. I'm excited about that. U.S. fears February 7 could bring major upheaval in Haiti. The Biden administration and the U.S. intelligence community are increasingly concerned that Haiti is approaching a dangerous flashpoint in February when they believe that the term of assassinated President Jovenel Moïse will officially end, deepening the country's political crisis during a simmering power struggle in Port-au-Prince. In the days following Moïse's assassination in July, his choice for the country's next prime minister, Ariel Henry, took over running the country in his place. That's interesting. It's also interesting that's on the front of the Miami Herald, but I suppose Haiti is kind of close, right? Cops' hunt for stolen car ends in chaos with a 15-year-old critically wounded. That's a shame. Okay, so that's how the Miami Herald presents itself. Stacey, good morning. She says, Anthony, are you ready for another lunch hour with me? Yes, I am, Stacey. Yes, I am. And Delphi is still here. Thank you for spending your morning with us. Stick around. I'm here for 2 hours, incidentally, and then your pal, Hal, will take over. No, let's look at that piece. This is also in the Miami Herald, politics piece here. It says, who will oppose Gimenez Salazar? Dems don't know yet. Just 7 months to the August primary. Democrats have little clue whose names they'll be marking on their ballots for 2 of South Florida's most competitive congressional races. Evidence is piling up that Democrats in Florida have no clear bench of candidates willing to challenge Republican incumbents in South Florida in what's expected to be a daunting and expensive 2022 cycle for their party. For 2 first-time candidates who made early announcements that they would run for South Florida House seats have both since dropped their bids to pursue runs for state office. A rumored likely candidate for federal office, former state Jose Javier Rodriguez, was recently nominated by President Joe Biden to serve as an assistant secretary to the Department of Labor. That's right. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I tell you something, these midterms, primaries, it's all going to be very, very messy. I know that much. To Georgia now, and the Rome News Tribune, Elections Board starts with full plate. Yes. An ambitious number of goals prior to the May primary will greet a newly constituted Floyd County Elections Board as it meets for the first time and is sworn in today. Prior to the meeting at 10 a.m. at the County Administration Building, the board members will be sworn in at 9 a.m. in Courtroom B of Floyd County Superior Court. In December, county commissioners named Ralph Davis and Corey Townsend as the two Democratic Party representatives, and Pam Peters and Gary Stamper as the Republican Party representatives on the board. Well, Jerry Lee will serve as the chair. The only member of the former board who will be on the new board is Townsend. You got that? You got that? Who's on base? Who's on base? Yeah, I don't know what pitching means. Who's on base? That's literally the only sport reference I think I know, and I think I heard that in an airplane movie. I'm like the least... Carla, do you know I used to actually be an announcer on British Eurosport? And I got fired because I couldn't say the names of any of the international players or sports people because I didn't know who anybody was. Yeah. And I also, one of my first radio jobs was announcing the sports results. And I didn't know how to do it because I'd never listened to it before. So I used to say things like Arsenal and Tottenham were playing, and the score there was 1-0. And nobody knew who got the goal. So that didn't last very long. Yeah. I've never really enjoyed... I tell you what it is. I'm not competitive. That's what it is. Like, I don't have any kind of competition, interesting competition. And some people love it, and they love to partake in competition, and I have never enjoyed it. I've never entered a talent contest or anything. It's only very recently did my partners start kind of putting my work in for competitive awards, and I actually won them all, which is rather wonderful. But I mean, ironically, I've never been interested in competition. Never. And for that reason, sport has never really interested me because I don't really care who wins. I don't really like board games, to do board games over Christmas and stuff. I'm just not interested. I don't mind like playing, like charades and like stand-up, miming type games that are more fun and you can like get into. But the idea of like pieces on a Monopoly board, I just don't have the head for it. I'm a very simple man. Dr. Fauci says too soon to say Omicron heralds end of pandemic. Yes, Dr. Anthony Fauci, the top medical advisor of the US. They should probably stop saying that. They always follows his name, doesn't it? The US's top medical advisor. Maybe they should take the pressure off Fauci because, the right-wing media make him out to be the enemy. Marjorie Taylor Greene thinks that he's created a bioweapon in COVID-19. And so maybe we need to just stop saying that he's like the super top duper duper super two, because it's like when Rand Paul and him go head to head in the Senate, when he's being interrogated, Rand Paul's always like, well, why do we have to live in Dr. Fauci's world? And Fauci's like, it's not my world. I'm like just an advisor. And the other day he said, everything I say is in line with the CDC. I don't say anything out of the unusual. Yeah. He went, what a moron. Rand Paul is a moron. And I say that in the nicest possible way. He calls himself Dr. Rand Paul. He's not really a doctor. He's an unlicensed ophthalmologist. He's I watched an entire speech that he gave at a university a few years ago, yesterday, just to see what Rand Paul had to offer. He talked about how he likes to spread misinformation. He actually said it out loud. Rand Paul, to an entire congregation of young people at a university. Talks about how he likes to spread misinformation because it can be helpful. Anyway. Fauci said it's too soon to say whether the Omicron variant will herald a shift in the COVID-19 pandemic to endemic. He said it's an open question as to whether or not Omicron is going to be the live virus vaccination everyone is hoping for, because we have so much variability with new variants emerging, Fauci said on Monday at the World Economic Forum's Davos Agenda online conference. The fact that the virus's mutations appear to be able to evade some immune response through vaccines and infection will make achieving herd immunity difficult, he said. The US official said variant-specific vaccines aren't the best way to fight the disease, and that inoculations that work against all strains are needed. That's very interesting, isn't it? Fauci really is the voice of reason. Because he could quite easily say, yeah, we need an Omicron vaccine, and then we're going to need a different vaccine for that. And he's not saying that. He's saying we need a vaccine that just gets all strains. He said we don't want to get into a whack-a-mole for every variant where you have to make a booster against a particular variant. He said you'll be chasing it forever. That's the reason why we're all pushing for is finding out what the mechanisms are that induce a response to a commonality among the real and potential variants we're seeing and that occur. Do you know Fauci is 81? He's amazing. He's just amazing. Oh, the documentary about Fauci is amazing. It's a National Geographic documentary. I watched it on Disney, but you can find it somewhere else. And it's just called Fauci. And it was made last year. Just called Fauci. And it's about his life as an epidemiologist and, a lifelong public servant. Right up to present day. I mean, the guy is like pretty special. He went into the gay community in New York in the 80s as a government official and sat amongst all of these urban dudes in his suit to listen to what they had to say and to take back what they had to say and apply it to health policy. He broke the mold where the government was like separate to the people, and he just went in and he integrated himself and he became a champion of AIDS research because he embedded himself in the community. He's a really good person. And yet the right-wing media paint him as this evil drug lord. It's so offensive. Fauci said resistance to time-tested public health measures is also hindering the fight against COVID-19. We have such a degree of pushback against regular, normal, easy-to-understand public health measures. A reluctance to wear masks, to promote vaccination, to do the kinds of measures we know if we all pull together as a society will be much better off. Richard Hatchett, the CEO of Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness and Innovations, said the virus appears to have the capacity to become pandemic at any time. He said Omicron has moved very, very rapidly, behaving exactly like an acute pandemic, and the virus is going to retain that capability in the future. And that's something I think should be quite concerning. I mean, I've said this all along. I've said I do not think this is going to end. I just cannot see the end of this. I think this is something we are going to live with. And potentially as a pandemic, One of my best friends in London just messaged me this morning to say that he got COVID. And he said that it's really tough, And he said he's thrilled that he's vaccinated because if he wasn't, he thinks that this could really have been very, very difficult for him. We shall overcome is also the headline on the Rome News Tribune this morning. Despite chilling winds and snow flurries, a large crowd of people gathered at First Avenue and Broad Street on Monday to celebrate the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. The Freedom March and Martin Luther King weekend celebration has been a Rome staple for 37 years. Alvin Jackson, who helped found the Martin Luther King Jr. Commission and continues to serve on the board, said the original march had 5 participants. It has now grown exponentially. However, because of the pandemic, they've had to make some adjustments to the march and the turnout wasn't quite as large as in previous years. Still, people showed up in face masks and with signs in hand to honor King's legacy. Before the march began, Jackson thanked everyone for turning out in spite of cold weather. So, yes, rather wonderful. The Martin Luther King Freedom March. And a photograph of Alvin Jackson speaking to the group gathered before the City Hall. Next to him is a sign with a portion of King's 1964 Nobel Peace Prize acceptance speech. We have learned to fly the air like birds and swim the sea like fish, but we have not learned the simple art of living together as brothers. And ironically, here we are, decades later, and we still haven't learned to live together like brothers. 9:22 here on the West Coast, 12:22 Eastern. This is Backchannel. I'm Anthony Davis. We're looking at the Rome News Tribune this morning. Another headline is what Kemp budget has for healthcare and what it doesn't. Extending Medicaid cover for women who have given birth. Higher pay for physicians serving Georgia's poor. More money for rural healthcare. In many ways, healthcare is getting a boost in Governor Brian Kemp's budget. Kemp's proposed budget envisions a record $30 billion in state spending next year. The highest profile items include $5,000 pay raises for state employees, $2,000 bonuses for teachers, and $1.6 billion tax refund for Georgians. I was talking to a friend a couple of days ago. Carla, you'll like this. You know that California is extending free healthcare to immigrants who earn below a certain amount of money. We're talking about, undocumented immigrants or just people who, can't afford healthcare. And they're basically, and there's a surplus in the California budget. So because of this, a friend was telling me that they have a friend who has a very good doctor, a primary physician, who has decided that because of this and a few other things, is going to start charging a $6,000 retainer per year if you want to see that doctor. So he's like, your healthcare coverage will cover me. That's fine. But you personally are going to have to pay the $6,000 each year for me to make room for you if you want me to see you and to treat you. It's a flat retainer fee. This is the level of corruption in the healthcare system here in America, that a doctor can take it upon himself to decide that there should be an annual surcharge for being on his list of patients. I mean, as if these people don't make enough money as it is. And I don't quite know how it's connected to the adjustment in healthcare. Maybe he'll be paid less because he has to treat people under the, Medicare program for immigrants. I don't know. I doubt it. I doubt it very much. But he is so busy. He's so busy and he is so popular that he has decided to charge each and every one of his patients who wants to continue seeing him a $6,000 annual surcharge. Yeah, he knows that people will pay it. But, the economy here in California is like that. People will look at, if you knew how much I have to pay to send my little boy to preschool, just to preschool. It's not even school. He's only 3. How much the preschool costs every month here in Hollywood. It's like you wouldn't believe it. I'll happily tell you, but it's like seriously? It's the equivalent of about $30,000 a year. No, there are no free preschools for children. If you want to send a child to preschool, you have to pay. There's no free ones. They don't have that. I mean, that's something that Biden wanted to bring in his social and climate bill, was free preschool for under fives. He wanted to. That was part of the bill, and it's not been sanctioned. So, people have to pay. Everybody has to pay. Now, sure, if you live in a different area, we happen to live in an expensive area, but they know people will pay it. So it's like $2,200 a month. Plus, there was a $1,300 enrollment fee, and then you have to pay $350 for an emergency kit in case there's an earthquake. I mean, I'm down for homeschool. The way we qualified it was that because of the pandemic, he's not been going to a preschool. And so it's only going to be for 18 months because he's 3.5. So it's only going to be for 18 months before he can go to elementary school, which will be free, where my daughter goes. So we were like, look, maybe because we're desperate for him to get a good grounding. My daughter went to a nice preschool. And so it's important for him to kind of get some integration, social integration, and be at and this really is considered to be one of the very best preschools in the area. And I know what you're thinking. For that price, it should be. But it really is. I mean, it's quite spectacular. It's not, I remember when I first took him and I was like, wow, this is not the environment that I grew up in. They have an indoor swimming pool. The roof was paid for by Elon Musk, who sent his kids there. Right? Elon Musk paid for the roof. Isn't that insane? Because his kids went there. I only found that out yesterday. It's quite funny, though. It's like an outdoor pool with one of those glass conservatory coverings. It's beautiful. They've turned it into an indoor pool. He's just started getting in the pool. He can't swim yet, but he's just started getting in the pool. It's taken him a long time to kind of feel comfortable with the water. My daughter swims like a fish. I mean, she's underwater and... I mean, we sent my daughter... I mean, here's another thing, right? It's the cost of swimming lessons. Let me tell you this, right? We were going to Mexico a few years ago, and we really wanted her to learn to swim before we went. And we sent her to a guy who's considered the best swimming teacher in the area. It's like $500 to learn to swim in the guy's backyard. I was like, wow. $500 to learn to swim in the guy's backyard. On the very first day I went along, he dunks them under the water. I'm like, I'm paying you $500 to drown my child. He dunks them under the water and makes them swim under his legs. These children can't swim. They've never swam. He dunks them under the water, pushes their head between his legs, and they pop up out the back. That was the very first session of the $500 swimming lesson. And I was like, wow. I was like, I could have done that. Right? But I tell you something, she's not scared of the water anymore. Not scared of the water. Interesting. Yeah, he is like a Navy SEAL. That's exactly what he is, Carla. He's basically I actually cried when I watched him with the kids. He is like a baby whisperer. He's like one of these people that just, he's a father himself. He understands children so implicitly. And he looked at my daughter and he's like, I will not let you drown. And then dunked her under the water. It was kind of magical to watch. I trusted him. I was invested. The Lewiston Tribune this morning leads with making a commitment to change. Speakers share thoughts about equality and racism on Martin Luther King Day in Lewiston. Learn the system, work the system. That's the motto of Michaela Thompson. She works to create change and equality for the people of her community. It's how Thompson came to talk about the intersectionality of race and gender as part of Lewiston's Martin Luther King Day Jr. community celebration on Monday. She spoke via Zoom at the YWCA from her residence in Alexandria, Virginia. She's a member of the Nez Perce tribe and graduated from Lewis Clark State College in 2020 with a degree in business communications and a minor in Nez Perce language. She owns Beadwork by Michaela, is the founder of Indigenous Creative and co-hosts See Page 5. Yeah. So that's making a commitment to change. So many people, like real grassroots activism to spread the word for freedom and for educating a whole new generation, because this is clearly, someone's dropped the ball somewhere. Voting rights takes center stage. They say Vice President Kamala Harris, Georgia's first black U.S. senator and the youngest daughter of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., each made passionate calls on Monday for passage of new federal voting rights laws at the annual remembrance for the slain civil rights leader, warning democracy hangs in the balance. In tributes to King, they also called upon Americans to follow in his footsteps, to push lawmakers through nonviolent organization to pass voting rights legislation currently stalled in the U.S. Senate. The speeches at Atlanta's Ebenezer Baptist Church are part of a pressure campaign to force Senate Democrats to relax filibuster rules to allow for approval of federal voting rights law to get around unified Republican opposition to the evenly divided chamber. Republicans call the legislation a gross overreach of federal authority and a partisan power grab. Manchin and Sinema have so far refused calls by Biden and other Democrats and activists to eliminate the Senate's filibuster rule, which requires 60 votes to advance most bills or to carve out an exception for voting rights. It's not going to happen. It just isn't. And I'll tell you why. Because, there are so many things in these bills. There are so many changes. And Republicans, the only way that they would agree to it, a little bit like they did with infrastructure. I mean, look at infrastructure, went from, and also social and climate, the cost of these bills was trillions. And by the time they'd negotiated with Republicans, the price had come down to billions. They just don't like change. They don't want to spend. They don't want to deliver. They just want to keep things the same and manipulate it so that they can maintain majority rule in the next election, or certainly in the midterms. That they will not budge. And the problem is because voting rights has been neglected over the years, certainly since Obama was in office. Because voting rights has been neglected and really could have been updated in a little piece by piece every year since that landmark change under Obama, it's been neglected. And so now there's a lot to do. There's a lot to change. Because Republicans have been working away under the radar, making things work for themselves. Because they know that it's unlikely they'll get elected again, so they have to cheat. So of course they're not going to go for it. I have no idea how they're going to make this work. I don't know enough about the American, Senate to know the history, case law, historical law as to how they get around these things. But my feeling and attitude is that, if you can if you can create the filibuster in the first place, then surely you can remove it, even temporarily. China's Xi reject Cold War mentality on the front of the Lewiston Tribune this morning. It says Chinese President Xi Jinping said on Monday that his country will send an additional 1 billion doses of the COVID-19 vaccine to other countries, calling for global cooperation to tackle the pandemic and other challenges, while urging other powers to discard a Cold War mentality, a veiled swipe at the United States. Xi touted China's efforts to share vaccines, fight climate change, and promote development in the opening speech of a virtual gathering hosted by the World Economic Forum. The online event is being held after the group put off its annual meeting in Davos, Switzerland, because of the coronavirus pandemic and efforts to battle the global outbreak that has claimed more than 5.5 million lives and upended the world economy and climate change were prominent themes Monday in a panel session on the virus. Moderna's CEO said the vaccine maker was working on a single-shot booster for both COVID-19 and the flu, while US infectious disease expert Fauci lamented as very disturbing the reluctance of many Americans to follow basic measures like mask wearing and getting vaccinated. Xi, who hasn't left China since the coronavirus emerged in the early 2020s, said his country has exported more than 2 billion doses to more than 120 countries. See, the thing with Xi Jinping is that he's all very nice on the surface. He always puts out very lovely statements, but, what he says and what he does are often very different things. And this is the Chinese way. This is this kind of communist attitude, is that we'll make you feel warm and cozy. And yet we'll say we're doing more for climate change than ever, and you'll still be the greatest emitter on the planet. The change is just not fast enough. Texas rabbi tells of throwing chair before narrow escape. Yes, I found this story kind of interesting. I've been reading more about the synagogue in Colleyville. It says the rabbi of the Texas synagogue where a gunman took hostages during a live-streamed service on Monday said on Monday that he threw a chair at his captor before escaping with 2 others after an hours-long standoff, crediting past security training for getting himself and his congregants out safely. Rabbi Charlie Crichton Walker said that he let the gunman inside the suburban Fort Worth synagogue on Saturday because he appeared to need shelter. He said the man was not threatening or suspicious at first. Later, he heard a gun click as he was praying. Another man held hostage, Jeffrey Cohen, described the ordeal on Facebook on Monday. He said, "First of all, we escaped. We weren't released or freed." He was one of the 4 people in the synagogue for services. Cohen said the men worked to keep the gunman engaged. They talked to him. They lectured him. At one point, as the situation devolved, Cohen said the gunman told them to get on their knees. Cohen recalled rearing up in his chair and slowly moving his head and mouthing "no" as the gunman moved to sit back down. Cohen said Crichton Walker yelled to run. The exit wasn't too far away. So they basically lobbed a chair at this guy and ran for it. It wasn't anything to do with the police showing up and all they did was show up and kill the gunman, or potentially the gunman killed himself. But I actually think they probably killed him because it sounds to me like this gunman was a little bit of a coward. We'll find out, obviously, once it's been investigated. But, as I said on the show yesterday, why kill him? If you've got all of the experience of this SWAT team, wouldn't it be great if SWAT teams were trained to capture people and not execute them? Wouldn't it be lovely? They're like, oh, well, one less brown person. Maybe that's the attitude. It just beggars belief to me. I just don't understand why they think that somebody who hasn't yet committed a crime. He held people at gunpoint, sure. He took hostages. But he didn't kill anybody. It didn't even hurt anybody. Yet, if you put him on trial, you'll find out what his motives were and you'll learn from that. And then that will serve as an incentive, because certainly, if he's an Islamic extremist, dying for his cause is the ultimate sacrifice. It serves no purpose to execute this guy. Put him on trial. Learn from him. Broadcast what he has to say and the interrogation process, and see how he was radicalized, and then share that with the world. And maybe you'll prevent other people from becoming radicalized in the same way. Let's go to the Idaho Statesman now. How do you pronounce? Is it Boise? Is that how you pronounce it? Boise? I tell you, I do know someone who lives in Boise, Idaho. He's a singer. You may remember him from the 80s and 90s. His name was Curtis Stigers. Do you remember him? He had a big hit with a song called "I Wonder Why," and I know him a little bit, and he lives in Idaho, in Boise. He's very talented. Cheese factory boosts pay and benefits. It says facing expanded production at its Nampa cheese plant and increasingly competitive labor market. Lactalis American Group is investing $30 million in increased wages for workers and upgrading equipment. That's good. Without cheese, the world is chaos. Boise. It's Boise. Thank you for clarifying. $12 billion deal may bring hundreds from Qatar Air Force to Idaho base. It says the U.S. Air Force may soon bring 170 members of Qatar's Air Force to live on the Mountain Home Air Force Base. They'll be coming to learn to fly the newest model of the F-15 fighter jet, specially modified for the Persian Gulf. The Qatar trainees may be in for a culture shock should they find themselves in Mountain Home. More than 90% of Qataris live in the capital of Doha. The city is full of skyscrapers, luxury hotels and attractions, museums and world-class food. The country is also incredibly flat and dry, with the majority of its land being desert. Qatar is just one of 4 areas in the world without a single forest, not to mention the differing temperatures between Qatar and Idaho. Qatar averages 107 degrees in July and rarely gets below 50 degrees even in the winter. Surrounded on 3 sides by the Arabian Gulf, Qatar has skyrocketed to power in recent decades through its discovery of oil and natural gas, holding 13% of the world's oil reserve, and has become the richest country per capita in the world. Uh, 2.9 million residents are ruled by an absolute monarchy and live under a constitution based on Sharia law. I do kind of desire to go to Dubai and Qatar and the UAE, and actually kind of fancy it. I mean, I definitely want to go and see the Burj Khalifa in Dubai. Have you ever been there, Carla? You have no desire to go. Well, they don't like women very much, do they? Yeah, I know people that have lived there too. Yeah. No, well, you can't kiss anybody on the beach there. I mean, that would be the cardinal sin. You'd end up in a penitentiary. If a man and a woman openly had a little kiss on the beach. Famously, there was that British couple. Do you remember that kissed on the beach and they ended up in jail? 2 more Idaho lawmakers test positive for COVID-19 during the first week of the 2022 legislative session. Senate President Pro Tem Chuck Winder told the Idaho Statesman by phone on Monday morning he's isolating at home after receiving a positive test result last week. Winder said he had mild symptoms but was asymptomatic when he tested on Thursday. So there we go. That's the Idaho Statesman this morning. Thank you for your messages, by the way. Nice to know that you're part of the show. Delphia and Stacy and Delphia. It's 9:45. This is Backchannel. I'm Anthony Davis. At 10, we'll listen to the US News Update. It's our daily 2-minute news podcast that you can get wherever you get your podcasts. It's called US News Update. Let's go to Hawaii now and Honolulu and the Star Advertiser. Higher park fees sought for tourists. Legislators hope to expand and better manage visitors, with arrivals forecast to increase to nearly 10 million by the end of 2024. Yeah. With tourism arrivals to reach just below 10 million, the state prohibited from limiting the number of visitors. Some legislators feel pressure to expand parking and user fees at state parks designed to charge tourists for their impact on state lands. Interesting. Yeah. Kauai residents raise concerns over planned $1.9 billion missile radar. Kauai is one of the smaller islands of Hawaii. Chris Kayakapu loves fishing off West Kauai, where native Hawaiians have gathered for generations to practice subsistence fishing. But he's worried the Federal Missile Defense Agency's proposal to build the $1.9 billion missile defense radar at the Navy's Public Missile Range facility could result in less access at productive fishing grounds. He said, "We've pretty much had a very limited to no access since 9/11 in 2001, so we have no reason to doubt they wouldn't further those restrictions at the Kokole Point where it's proposed. It's a huge shoreline fishery for us West Side residents and Hawaiians. From Kekar all the way round to Polihale is some of the most productive shoreline fishery grounds." Yeah, I mean, this Homeland Defense radar, it's gigantic, huge thing. They say it could disrupt traditional fishing and potentially cause environmental damage. It's ugly as sin. It is very interesting, isn't it, though, how these outlying islands of the United States are, perfect places. I don't know if I've told you this, Carla, but I have a bit of a fascination with islands that we don't know exist, that are in the Atlantic Ocean, the South Atlantic, because they're so small they don't show up on the map until you zoom in. And there's a whole bunch of them. And some of them have airfields on them, because if your aeroplane gets into trouble and you're traveling across the Atlantic Ocean, where are you going to land, right? So do you know where the Azores are? Have you ever looked up the Azores? They're so small you'd never notice them there, but if you look up the Azores, there's a whole bunch of islands. It's just kind of, I'd say they're kind of west of Africa. West of South Africa. They actually belong to Spain, I think. Anyway, there is a secret runway there where pilots can put planes down for passenger jets that are traveling. In the same way that in Newfoundland, the very northeast point of Canada, the last place you can go before you impact the south of Iceland, and then you come into the kind of Outer Hebrides, the north of Scotland, up in the Arctic Circle. There's also obviously a famous runway at Gander, a place called Gander, and that's in Newfoundland, and that is a huge former military base. And that is, again, if you are traveling on the South Atlantic, if you're flying the South Atlantic route, then the Azores might be where you might need to put down. But if you're traveling the North Atlantic, Gander in Newfoundland is where you'll end up, which of course famously is where the musical Come From Away is based, which is all about 9/11, when all of the aircraft that were flying between the US and Europe and the US had to divert and land immediately because they closed all the airports. And so all of the aircraft that were in the North Atlantic diverted to Gander in Newfoundland. And they had dozens of aircraft. And all of these people, all of a sudden, in a town that only had a few hundred residents, and the residents came to their assistance and aid, and there was a musical made about it, using transcriptions from interviews with the people themselves. And they wrote the script and the songs based on transcriptions of the conversations and real people who found a sanctuary in the town of Gander. It's very interesting. So, of course, that's the North Atlantic, Gander. South Atlantic, the Azores. Let me just have a little look here on my map and see which of the island. Yeah, it's owned by Portugal. That's right, the Azores. So the one that's got the runway, exactly, but you can't see them. If you zoom out, you can't see them. They don't exist, right? They literally are in the middle of the South Atlantic, just like to the west of Spain. So you zoom right in, and the one that's got the runway, because only one of them has got an airport, right? And it has to be a pretty big runway because, of course, they could potentially see a lot of, suddenly they could see some big planes land. Because normally an airport on an island that small would have a small airport, but, apparently not. Let me just see which one of the Azores. Okay, so they've all got airports by the looks of it. The Santa Maria Airport, one of them is like a super big one. It's very interesting, isn't it, though, that these are Portuguese islands, nowhere near Portugal. And of course, the history of them will be fascinating to kind of find out how these became Portuguese islands. So there must have been some war over the territory. I didn't realize people really went to the Azores. I call it the Azores, but maybe it's Azores. But it is amazing. It's a whole cluster of islands that are so small that they don't even appear on a globe. They're too small. It's only if you go onto Google Maps and you zoom in, and it's basically off the west coast of Spain, but right in the middle of the South Atlantic Ocean. So it's almost near Africa. And, I know of these places because I'm interested in where aeroplanes go if they have an engine failure, let's say. Where do they end up? How do they get out of a tricky situation? And if you look up Gander, which is in the, in northeast Canada, it's literally the last point that is, it's so far away. Gander is so far away, it literally sits on the tip of Newfoundland. That is the other place that you'll go. Have you found Gander? Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? What's it called, the map that you like? Oh, a Peter's World map. Okay. Oh, great. Okay, so a Peter's map of the world. I'm just looking at one. A Peter's map of the world is basically it looks very different to the kind of colonial map. There's also the Gaul orthographic world map, which they call the world's most accurate map. But the Peter's projection world map is actually very similar. Wow, that's so interesting. South America is so much skinnier. That is fascinating. Yeah, the shape of, Australia is not half as wide as you think it is. I guess this is taking into account for the fact that the world is round. That's why when you look at a flight route, say from New York to London, it goes up and over. And it's like, why does it go up and over? And it's because it's taking into consideration that the world is not flat, although some people still believe that it is. So we've learned a few things today. We've learned about the Azores, the little islands that are Portuguese, that are way, way off the coast of Spain, right in the middle of the South Atlantic. There's Gander in Newfoundland, which is way north, Canada, northeast Canada. And then, of course, the Peters Projection World Map, that is a far more accurate version of the colonial map that we've come to believe is what the world looks like. I love that. Thank you for that knowledge. It's really interesting. It's just, I don't know. It's just you can have the world map thing has floored me a little bit because, of course, my entire life I've been exposed to an image of the world. And now Carla, my dear friend in London, who's producing the show, has totally burst my bubble. She's basically squished some of the countries that are closest to my heart. What does the United Kingdom look like? Oh, it's just more squat. It's more squat. It's very interesting. It's like the whole aspect ratio of the world has been made anamorphic. Interesting. And it makes you realize how huge Africa is and how similarly shaped it is to South America. And how Argentina and Brazil together make up a very similar shaped continent to Africa. And it also, I didn't realize there was so much of a gap between Europe and Africa. Like the sea there. The res on this is too low for me to see, but that sea, is that the Mediterranean? I think it is. Yeah, the Mediterranean is a much wider sea than I thought it was before. It's very interesting. And Iceland is so skinny. I thought Iceland was this huge mass, and it's a strip in Peter's map. Very interesting. Madeline has joined us. Good morning. Thank you for joining Backchannel. And guacamole is here as well, my favorite dip next to artichoke. We're looking at the morning papers. We're discussing, where in the world you might divert to if it was an emergency and where you'd have to end up. Kind of interesting, isn't it? If you've ever traveled internationally between America and Europe, did you ever consider where you might have to fly to if the engine failed and they couldn't restart it when you were over the sea? I want to know. I just want to know. I'm very risk averse. I'd like to know where we might end up, just in case I've got friends in Newfoundland. Are we going to do the US news update in 30 seconds' time? I think that would be a good idea. The time has really whizzed on. We've been here for an hour having these conversations. It goes so fast when you're having a good time. The US News Update is a daily podcast that I do for the Volley Network, and you can get it wherever you get your podcasts. It's available to download for free, and it's 2 minutes long, and it's called the US Daily News Update, and here it is. It's Tuesday, January 15. From the Volley Network, this is your daily US News Update. I'm Anthony Davis. President Joe Biden traveled to Philadelphia on Sunday to honor the legacy of slain civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr. as he continues to press for voting rights legislation and concerted action to combat rising extremism. Biden's visit to the city of brotherly love came hours after an FBI hostage rescue team stormed a synagogue in Colleyville, Texas, to free 3 hostages after a more than 10-hour standoff. Another hostage had been freed earlier. The president, who was briefed on the crisis as it unfolded, said there was more to learn about what motivated the hostage taker, but pledged to stand against anti-Semitism and against the rise of extremism in the country. In a proclamation on Friday, Biden warned against complacency, said it was crucial to continue King's work by enacting legislation to protect voting rights, opposing the rise of white supremacism and other forms of extremism, and pressing for greater economic justice. Living up to his legacy and what Dr. King believed our nation could become requires more than just reflection. It requires action, said Biden. But Biden's push to enact voting rights legislation appears doomed after Democratic Senators Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin said they oppose changing the Senate's filibuster rule, which requires that 60 of the 100 senators agree on most legislation in a chamber where Democrats now hold only 50 seats. Your daily US news update is part of the Volley Network. To hear my live daily morning show, ask your Amazon Echo device to open Backchannel. There it is, the US news update. There it goes. And you can download it wherever you get your podcasts. It's the 18th of January, 2022. I'm Anthony Davis. Welcome to Backchannel. Thank you for joining in. And if you would like to message the show, you can go to backchannel.tv where you can send a message without registering. Backchannel has a growing list of shows, including Haley and Allison Live, waking you up in the morning with lots of laughs and their 1-star cinema review. Or Live Every Day with Liv Harrison live from Texas, celebrating the little things in life with plenty of little things. Or what about the charming and funny Hal Rudnick, whose program Your Pal Hal directly follows this show at 11 a.m. Pacific, that's 2 p.m. Eastern, right here on Backchannel. Okay, well, let's go back to our morning newspapers. We've got lots that we're discussing this morning, and the papers really are the impetus for a lot of these conversations. Burnout deepens for Iowa healthcare workers. This is Rachel Fratzk led her Mercy, Iowa city nursing staff in a meditation session to start the workday on a recent morning. She had the nurses do deep breathing exercises and think about when they first wanted to be a nurse. Oh my goodness, I mean, this is what it's come to when COVID-19 has just decimated the healthcare industry. I mean, it's actually made a huge profit for the healthcare industry, but nurses are not being paid anymore for devoting their lives to this. They're having to do meditation. They're saying burnout is not going to go away anytime soon. The pandemic is not going to go away anytime soon. Also, anybody can be a part of it. Joy marchers pause for a dance party on the corner of Lynn and Washington Streets in Iowa City on Saturday. The Joy March takes place every 3 months, and the colourful show welcomes all participants. Isn't that fun? A Joy March. It's kind of weird. Kind of weird. I mean, why not? Why not have a little march just for the sake of joy? Iowa proposal to outlaw vaccine mandates draws union and leaders' ire. It says a union official representing Iowa meatpacking employees, including thousands subject to a company vaccination mandate, is criticizing a Republican proposal to block businesses from requiring workers to be immunized against COVID-19. The Iowa lawmakers behind the proposal contend vaccine mandates are a violation of workers' civil rights. But Mark Lauriston, the United Food and Commercial Workers International Director of Processing, Packing and Manufacturing, accused them of trying to please conservative voters at the risk of public health. Do you know that's actually the first time I've heard somebody kind of eloquently put that sentence? You know? Accusing them of trying to please conservative voters at the risk of public health. It is very eloquently put, because it's taken me sometimes 2 hours to say that. He says it certainly doesn't make good scientific sense, he said, of their proposal, which would ban companies from making employment decisions based on a worker's vaccination status, and it certainly doesn't make good health policy. So for their political points, they watch Iowans get sick and Iowans die and Iowans get hospitalized. Yeah, I mean, if you put it like that, it's pretty obvious, isn't it? I spoke to my friend this morning in London who has COVID and is not doing very well. And he said that he's fallen out with another one of our friends because he is refusing to get vaccinated. He's anti-vax and his mother is anti-vax, and they are just not willing to do it. And it's like, I actually said to him, I could have said that I bet he would be anti-vax. There are some people, you just know that they are just, I call them vulnerable. I think there are people who are vulnerable, who are open to a persuasion. And that is actually what it is. It's not about politics at all, really. It's about this feeling of being out of control. And this is why I'm listening to this new podcast by Stephen Hassan about cults. And I've been learning a lot, actually, about how even intelligent people, very educated, well-read, intelligent people can be subject to brainwashing. And this is what's happened with Trump and the virus. Remember, he said out loud, it's the Democrats' new hoax. Do you remember he said that back in March, maybe February or March, at a rally? It's the Democrats' new hoax. And by planting the seed that it was a hoax, that kind of led all of his minions to kind of double down the rabbit hole and for misinformation to spread. Because for political reasons, having an election the same year as a pandemic meant that Trump was used the only tricks that he knew, which was to libel and to lie effectively. And he actually saw the pandemic as the opposition. He gave it to the Democrats to own. He made them own the pandemic. And what he should have done is taken ownership of it himself. And that's why it's so weird now when you see him trying to take ownership of the vaccines, claiming that he invented them and all this stuff. Because he actually gave the pandemic away to the other side. He didn't want to have anything to do with it because he saw it as interfering with his campaign to make America white again. Lauriston's comments come amid a surge in coronavirus cases and debate, both in Iowa and nationally, over vaccine requirements. The meatpacking employees of the UFCW represents many of whom work on tightly spaced production lines, were among the groups most affected by the virus as the pandemic began nearly 2 years ago. Those who work for Tyson Foods, including about 11,000 in Iowa, are required by the company to be vaccinated. On Thursday, the U.S. Supreme Court blocked a Biden administration mandate that would have required employees of large companies to get the vaccine or submit weekly COVID tests. The court upheld a similar mandate for healthcare workers. I mean, this is, we're going to talk about this shortly, but this is a very interesting premise, and I really do need to applaud Mark Lauriston, the United Food and Commercial Workers International Director of Processing, Packing and Manufacturing, for eloquently saying that they were trying to please conservative voters at the risk of public health. Because, of course, there's no conservative policy. I wouldn't mind, but there's no policy. It's just to oppose anything that the government, the federal government require, and to take it to the Supreme Court, which is packed with conservatives. I mean, there's nothing fair or just about what's happening in America at the moment. Okay, let's look at the Muskegon Chronicle from Michigan now. They lead this morning. This is an interesting newspaper. We haven't done this one before. As black teachers leave classrooms, students go too. 6% of Michigan's teachers are black, while 91% are white. And a photograph, very good one, of pencils. And all kind of sharpened and full length, and yet one of the pencils is a small black pencil. showing this representation of the minority of teachers in Michigan being black. It said racial disparities are growing in the teacher workforce in Michigan as the number of black teachers in classrooms shrinks and students in urban districts seek their education elsewhere. The number of K-12 black teachers in Michigan decreased by 48% from 2005 to 2015, according to a Michigan State University study. It's insane. It just doesn't surprise me, though. It just doesn't surprise me. This is America. Doug Pratt, Director of Public Affairs for the Michigan Education Association, said some of the loss is based on the larger education shortage issues Michigan has been facing due to low compensation and limited respect for the profession, which has been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. Lack of respect or limited respect for the profession of teaching, which arguably is the greatest profession in history. That said, there are specific issues facing black educators and others in the black, indigenous, and people of color community with regard to educator recruitment and retention. Teachers who are white make up a majority of Michigan's teacher workforce, about 91%, while black teachers account for a little over 6%. A black woman working in the Lansing Public School District, Regina Deloach, 23, said that added microaggressions she and other colleagues of color face contribute to pushing them out of the profession. Deloach said these microaggressions could be comments made about an individual's hair, nails, or makeup, and while such personal expressions may not fit into the traditional teacher's archetype, which she sees as being a middle-class suburban white woman, these features most times reflect cultural norms of one's community. She said black teachers go into spaces and they still have to deal with microaggressions on top of the now declining support, and it gets to be too much for a lot of people. It becomes the feather that tips the scale. It's very eloquent for a 23-year-old. But, this supports my theory that black people have evolved more than white people. Because they have to. They have to overeducate themselves. They have to have a better command of the language. They have to be more aware, have a better radar for social situations. I wonder if a 23-year-old white teacher would refer to the feather that tips the scale. During the period of the study, it was also shown that suburban districts are receiving large numbers of incoming black students, the results of factors such as schools closing within urban city districts, school of choice arrangements allowing students to travel outside of their neighborhood, school districts, and socioeconomic changes. It's fascinating, but it's kind of insane, isn't it? Expect trial delays until 2024, Snyder Camp says. A spokesman for the legal team representing the former governor blames prosecutors for dragging the timeline, and UN president broke rule he introduced. That's the President Mark Schlissel, fired for breaking the same rule he announced and implemented this summer. Oh, coupons are massive in America. Of course, yes. Here people use coupons all the time. Yes, there's coupons on the front of the newspaper. This is a $50 restaurant gift card, $99 installation. Invariably, these special offer coupons are, these types are more, adverts that are designed to look like you're getting a deal when you're not. But no, in the supermarket, I always see people pulling coupons. And for going to Walgreens or CVS or any of the pharmacies, there's always coupons for those. Because these places are expensive, and it's necessary to have coupons. Without the coupons, it's too much money. If I didn't use my Ralph's card to get a discount on my grocery shopping, then it would be too expensive. But you see, what they do is they make it look like you're getting a deal when you're not. So they hike the price of everything. And then they say, well, if you do the Ralph's card, then of course they get your data. What they want is your personal data. They want your shopping habits, and they want your spend and your demographic information. And so then you swipe your Ralph's card, and then that reduces your bill by about 10%, which is about the right price for the groceries. I mean, the cost of groceries here in Los Angeles compared to England is a joke. I mean, I could shop. It used to be around 10 to 15 pounds a bag. That's how I used to price it in London. If I was doing a big shop, each bag of shopping was 10 to 15 pounds. Each bag of shopping here is kind of $40. Yeah, it's insane. It's a completely different world that one lives in. I mean, look at the price of, children's education as an example. But the economies are different. We're going to look at the Texas primary just for a few minutes now. It's 16 after 10. This is Backchannel. I'm Anthony Davis. I want to ask if you know why a primary is important and if you'll be voting in your primary, and if you vote, and if not, why not, and what would convince you to take an interest. As Democrats nationally brace themselves for a tough year, progressives are looking to Texas, first in the nation's primaries on March 1st, and two Texas candidates in particular to test their midterm muscle. Both Jessica Cisneros and Greg Casar are supported by Justice Democrats, an organizing group known for backing Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's successful bid to oust the incumbent Representative Joe Crowley in 2018. We know Joe Crowley was a Democrat. And so she basically ousted a Democrat. She was a Democrat ousting a Democrat because he was so useless. There's a wonderful documentary about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, about her rise, and how she started out. And she was, waiting tables and doing late shifts in the restaurant, and so she could study, so she could go to college, and the tragedy of her amazing story is that the Republicans, and I watch them on Fox News, they refer to her as a waitress. They're just like a demeaning job. Well, she's just a waitress. Why should we listen to anything she says? She's just a waitress. She's a U.S. Congresswoman who arguably has done more good in 3 years than most of them have done in their entire careers, and they demean her by referring to her as a waitress. Because she's Puerto Rican and she talks with an accent, a Bronxy accent, and they just, for that purpose, they just dismiss her. They just dismiss her. And it's so offensive because she's going to be the president one day. She could. And also the other thing that I really don't enjoy, and Carlo, I'm sure you have a view on this as well, but to refer to Democrats as progressives. I don't see Democrats as progressives at all. I see Democrats as just normal. A real progressive is somebody that is, reaching to the furthest kind of technical and social kind of experimental constructs. But, a progressive, what, the Green New Deal? That's not progressive. It's happening everywhere else on the planet apart from America. To energize their countries with wind turbines and solar panels. This is just normal. Don't think for a second that is progressive. It's not progressive. It's just America is so backward. They say progressive ideas have always proven to be extremely popular across the country, Justice Democrats candidate communications manager Uzma Andrabi told the Daily Beast, citing positions like Medicare for all and access to reproductive health services. It's not progressive to have an abortion. It's just not. It's not progressive. Yeah. I find it offensive because it's only because people don't leave this country and get a perspective on what is going on around the rest of the world. Medicare for all is not progressive. We've had healthcare for all in England since 1946. That's how long we've had free healthcare for everybody, since 1946. And, you know, we've had legal abortion since, I mean, it was pre-war, I'm sure, in the UK. They say it's the second time Justice Democrats have backed Cisneros, a 28-year-old immigration attorney who came within 3.6 points of unseating longtime Texas incumbent Representative Henry Cuellar in the 2020 Democratic primary. Now, with name recognition and campaign experience in hand, Cisneros is running against Cuellar again, with hopes that her district has warmed up to her progressive chops. It's not progressive. It's just not. But, you know, you were talking about Texas. So maybe in Texas, it is. I mean, that's the tragedy of this entire conversation, isn't it? That, you know, here in California, none of these things are considered progressive, you know, because we already have access to women's health care. We also already have, free health care for migrants. We already have solar city and wind turbines, and it's just all happening here. You know, every other car is electric. But if you go to Texas, it's like going back to 1952. There's people on horseback. It's interesting how a lot of these kind of classic American cultural events like the rodeo, for example. Think about the rodeo. You know, I've watched these rodeos on television in documentaries where people are crowded into a I don't know what you would call an equestrian stadium of sorts, but the atmosphere, it's identical to how it was decades ago. Cuellar has been running on this myth that South Texas is conservative and he's the only kind of Democrat that's able to win. Again, we kind of showed how weak, that actual myth is, Cisneros said, referencing her sizable portion of the vote last primary election. And not unlike 2020, some of Cuellar's own congressional colleagues are backing his opponent this cycle. Cuellar is one of the most conservative Democrats in Congress, and the only House Democrat to vote against codifying abortion rights into law last September. In 2019, he was given an A by the National Rifle Association. I mean, maybe this is what I don't understand about, not just this guy, but also Joe Manchin of West Virginia and Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona. These people who are effectively, I don't know, they're kind of in the wrong party, aren't they? They're just in the wrong party. But why do they stay with the Democrats? What is it about Joe Manchin that he feels that he can still claim to be a Democrat and yet want to kind of prevent an entire generational political movement from evolving? It doesn't make sense to me. Democrats have tried flipping Texas blue, investing time and cash galore. Those efforts have come to limited statewide avail, as Republicans have a stronghold on both Senate seats and the governor's mansion. Texas ultimately went to Donald Trump by 5.6 points in 2020. But it was 9 points in 2016. So it's heading in the right direction, potentially. In the days and weeks following Texas's first-in-the-nation primary night, scores of progressives nationwide will make similar attempts as Cuellar and Cisneros to win a ticket to Congress. Some candidates more viable than others, of course, and all with more time to persuade voters than the Texas group. The seriousness of going first is not lost on Cisneros, who said with early voting starting February 14, she'll be spending the next few weeks ensuring folks understand what's at stake. We need to do a good job because we're setting the tone for the rest of the election cycle, she said. It's so interesting. I mean, I'm learning so much about this amazing country. I do love this country enormously. I mean, I know sometimes it sounds like I'm just slagging it off, but I genuinely think it is the most incredible place to live. Genuinely. And I can't imagine living in England again. I have no desire to live in my country of birth. Yeah, I think, the American, you see, in England, here's a perfect example, Carl, of the difference between England and America, right? If somebody shows up in a supercar, right, on Rodeo Drive, and a bunch of Americans on the side will be like, wow, look at that Bugatti Veyron. One day, I'm going to work hard, and I'm going to get me a supercar like that. That could be me. And yet, if the same supercar was to pull up on an English street and a bunch of people were standing around, they'd be like, look at that show-off. What an idiot. And they'd like run their key down the side of the car and deflate the tires and be like, that'll learn him. You know, it's just different culture. And, you know, when I was telling people that I was moving to Los Angeles, they said, well, why? It's so fake there. And I said, yeah, I'd much rather people be fake happy than genuinely miserable. Any day. You know, in America, it's like, hi, how are you? Great, how are you? In England, it's like, how are you? Nah, mustn't grumble. Not too bad. Surviving. Yeah, have a nice day in America. It's like it's a very positive attitude, and that really does pay dividends. And so I wouldn't swap it for the world, you know. And when I was in England, I was overly positive. You know, I used to get into trouble for just chatting to everybody in public places and in stores and things, and people would be like, what is wrong with you? And then when I came to America, I realized it was because I was American. I was just American. So, you know, I come here to assimilate, to be part of this confident culture where we're not scared of each other. There's a lot of fear in England. I just want to have a little look at the Arizona rally of Donald Trump's the other day. The former president held his first rally of 2022 in Arizona, one of the focal points of his big lie that the election was rigged. Throughout the rally, Mr. Trump raged against his enemies, as much in the Republican Party as well as Joe Biden and the media. 5 takeaways from his speech. And I have to say, I watched much of this speech, and I did say the other day that I really wish that more people would watch it because, you know, you really need to know what this guy is up to because he is arguably the most dangerous person on the planet. He's far more dangerous than Vladimir Putin or President Xi Jinping or Kim Jong-un or Erdogan in Turkey or any of these people. Far more dangerous. So Trump still runs the GOP is one of the big takeaways. Carrie Lake, a former Arizona news anchor and gubernatorial candidate, gave one of the rally's opening speeches and joined Mr. Trump on stage. Before the president arrived in Arizona, this Republican state treasurer and also candidate for governor announced she would end her campaign and insisted would run for state treasurer. Mr. Trump also railed against Arizona's outgoing Republican governor, Doug Ducey, who said he's loathed for not decertifying the 2020 election results. Just listen to that for a second. He loathes the Republican governor for not decertifying the election results. He's never going to get my endorsement he said. Trump danced on the graves of retiring Republicans who voted to impeach him for inciting the U.S. Capitol riot on January 6. Most recently, Representative John Katko of New York. He vocally criticized Liz Cheney of Wyoming and Adam Kinzinger of Illinois, both of whom sit on the Select Committee investigating the riot. Well, hang on, if Trump is nothing to do with the riot, then why would he want to criticize Cheney and Kinzinger? Because Trump's nothing to do with the riot. He didn't incite the riot. Why would he care about Cheney and Kinzinger? Unless he had something to do with it. They're falling fast and furious. We're getting rid of them fast, he said. Trump opened the rally by saying the big lie is a lot of BS. Throughout, he spoke of how he won the election and continued to spread repeated lies on the race to thunderous applause. Now, let's just be clear about what's happening here. The former president of 4 years, who won the election fairly and squarely in 2016 and was inaugurated in 2017, is getting up on stage in Arizona and saying, I ran twice and we won twice and we did better the second time. We did much better the second time. He is rewriting history. And yet, there appears to be no mechanism to prevent this guy from running again. There seems to be no precedent to stop a rogue president He espoused conspiracy theories about January 6 and sympathy for rioters. He's long promoted conspiracy theories unrelated to the election, but throughout the rally, Mr. Trump openly espoused the conspiracy theory that Ray Epps, previously on the FBI's most wanted list, was a government informant who goaded people to come to the Capitol. The only person that goaded people to come to the Capitol was Trump. It's on tape. It's on tape. If you don't show strength, you're not going to have a country anymore, is what he said. And we're going to walk together. I'll go with you. We're going to walk to the Capitol. Like, I can hear him saying it in my head because I've watched that clip so many times. He also repeated his sympathy for Ashley Babbitt, the pro-Trump rioter who was shot and killed by a Capitol police officer after she stormed the building. Yes, she's been turned into a martyr for the far right. And Letitia James, who of course is, the AG down in New York, she is target number one because, of course, she's investigating it. She knows about the fraud that's gone on, allegedly, in Trump Tower, and she is onto him. And he can't bear it. I mean, this president was impeached twice. He was impeached twice. And still is able to run for the presidency. So if you think about his crimes, twice impeached, crimes against the United States, treason, refusal to hand over the presidency, which resulted in the country being without a president for 3 weeks, right? For 3 hours, refusing to call in the National Guard to protect the US Capitol whilst people were killed. I mean, the guy is, his criminal activities are all on video. I mean, this really is what we're dealing with now. We're dealing with a society that is irreparably broken when you can have the top dog get away with murder, literally. The Daily Beast reports there was a time when Donald Trump made news with his rallies, when he said things that utterly shocked us. We could forget the firestorm he started, for example, when he went after Colin Kaepernick and other NFL players who knelt during the national anthem in 2017, or the time he called Barack Obama the founder of ISIS. Well, Trump, it's just... I mean, we shouldn't laugh, but I mean, this guy, you voted for him, America. Twice! Trump's performance in Arizona on Saturday night, his first rally in months, his much-hyped chance to respond to the one-year anniversary of the January 6th Capitol riot was neither shocking nor terribly newsworthy. Well, I disagree with that. I actually think he dialed it up to 11. I think the rhetoric was way more authoritarianist than I have heard before. Because as a lot of the experts in authoritarians have written, that if he gets elected again, he's only doing it out of spite and remorse. And he is going to double down and go after the people that didn't support him or go after the people that criticized him. He is going to be a far worse version of himself, a pastiche of the former Trump, in a far more dictatorial and authoritative and divisive way than he was before, because he knows he can get away with it. The Arizona rally may have been the unofficial kickoff of his 2024 campaign, but this time around, Trump will have to work harder to break through, says the Daily Beast, and not because the media is less likely to give him ample airtime free of charge. If your entire shtick is based on shock value, eventually the audience grows inured, and the lack of substance becomes embarrassingly plain. I mean, he did start to kind of run out of stuff. This is when he said that white people are not getting access to COVID-19 therapeutics. And he said vaccines, which is, of course, entirely not true. I mean, everything he said was not true. But I mean, you could sense that the audience was like, well, what do you mean? We're not getting vaccinated because we don't want to, not because it's not available. Trump made assertions in Arizona on Saturday night that once might have garnered buzz, but they're getting little play. In its write-up of the rally, Politico said Trump issued a blistering response to Democrats and that he opened his speech by falsely claiming proof that the 2020 election was rigged. A more telling fact is the blistering response was not deemed worthy enough to be the site's lead story, but what might have spawned outrage and wagging tongues a few years ago now elicits a collective of yawns. I don't know that I agree with this. I recognize that we've heard it before, but what's different is he's still saying it. It was fine to say it the day after the election or the week after the election or the month after the election, but we're a year after the election. There's been all this proof now, all these recounts, all of these court cases where it's been thrown out. All these Republican legislatures going, Biden won fair and square. In fact, Biden actually got more votes when we've recounted. And Trump is still saying it. That's what's different. You see, Americans have very short memories. And this I was hearing about on the news last night. No, everyone has a short memory, but when it comes to social history, there was a whole thing on the news last night about Americans having very short memories. And this is why there are some Republicans who have, who don't think that the insurrection on January 6th is newsworthy. They're like, nothing happened that day. It was just a bunch of tourists, a few kind of bad people, but it was, they don't want to recognize the symbolism of a coup, of a nation being brought down, a government being brought down by insurrectionists. They're not interested. It's a little bit like, this whole thing of trying to eradicate slavery from the history books. Rolling Stone has done an interesting piece on this as well. Boasting about crowd size and spreading election lies, the former and inept president treats an Arizona rally crowd to more of the same, is what they say. Aileen has joined us. from Illinois. Hello, Aylin. Thank you for joining Backchannel. It's 20 minutes to 11 here on the West Coast, 20 minutes to 2 Eastern. It's the 18th of January, 2022. This is Backchannel. We're discussing the former president who held his first rally of 2022 in Arizona and continues to spread this lie that he won the election. He's actually saying the words, "I won, Biden didn't." I actually think that, we're just talking about his health. I actually think that nothing will change. There's been no deterioration of Trump over the period of his presidency. This is something we need to recognize. It's very important. And the reason that his physicality didn't deteriorate is because he didn't president. He didn't do anything. He didn't work. He didn't go to meetings. He didn't read the daily briefing. He didn't care for anything other than protecting his image. Do you remember that thing in his calendar called executive time? Do you remember that? Every day there would be a publishing of the president's daily events, and there would be between the hours of 9 a.m. and 11 a.m. executive time. Do you know what that was? That was him watching TV. That was him watching Fox News and just getting wound up before he started tweeting. And there's evidence of this because of the timing of the tweets and what they said that coincide with what was on Fox News or CNN at that very moment. And that's what he was doing during executive time. So this is why he didn't age, is because he didn't president. Whereas people like Barack Obama, after 8 years, was unrecognizable from the cool kid that he was, with black hair when he went in and gray hair when he came out. Because he procrastinated and he sympathized and he empathized and he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders and in his heart. But Trump did not. He cared nothing for other people. He just cared about how he looked, how he was going to look in a certain situation. So his entire presidency was just fighting the media. And that's why he is still as fit now as he was when he went into office. He's as fit and as fat as he always was. And in a way, that layer of subterraneous fat is preventing him from getting ill. He's just one of these people that doesn't appear to get sick, even though... Do you know, one of my favorite Trump quotes, there's quite a lot, when asked why he only eats McDonald's, is because he said, "At least you know where it came from. At least you know where it came from." Such was the inability of his intellect to well, there is no intellect. The inability of his mind to even stretch beyond the fact that, McDonald's, he thinks McDonald's comes from McDonald's. This is how little he knew about the global supply chain and international trade. Oh, well, that would be great. I would love that. Let's move on then, very quickly, shall we? Yeah, the Arizona rally is obviously available on YouTube, and you should watch it in full to see the true majesty of the insanity on display. There is no doubt in my mind that his mental health is deteriorating, and this is how I would have handled him as a member of the press from the very beginning, as a mental health patient. The guy is mentally ill. So you can't take what he says and be like, "Oh, well, this is what he means." Because he is a malignant narcissist with an ego the size of Trump Tower. This is why he builds big buildings and sticks his name on the top. Because his parents didn't love him. And this has been his lifelong battle. Amanda, welcome. From Florida, joining us here on Backchannel. It's 1:45 Eastern. And thank you for spending your morning with us. I'm Anthony Davis. It's the Anthony Davis Show. I want to talk about Eugene Eli, the American aviation pioneer, credited with the first shipboard aircraft takeoff and landing, because on this day, on January 18, 1911, he performed his first successful takeoff and landing from a ship in San Francisco. It's very interesting, these great pioneers. So much of aviation pioneering came from the United States. America really is the home of the aeroplane, the modern aviation. And he took off from U.S. Army's Selfridge Field, which is the now closed Tan Foreign racetrack at San Bruno, California. At approximately 10:45 a.m., he flew his Curtiss Eli Pusher to San Francisco Bay, where he landed aboard the armored cruiser USS Pennsylvania as it lay at anchor. A temporary wooden deck had been erected aboard the ship at Mare Island Shipyard. Built of wood, it was 133 feet, 7 inches long and 31 feet, 6 inches wide. 22 manila hemp cables were stretched across the deck at 3-foot intervals. They were there to catch hooks mounted beneath Eli's airplane and drag it to a stop. Each cable had a 50-pound sandbag at each end. The bags were precisely weighted so that Curtiss would not slew to one side. A guideway was laid out on the deck. And Captain Charles Fremont Pound, commanding Pennsylvania, offered to take the ship to sea in order that Eli would have the advantage of a headwind down the flight deck. But as winds in the bay were 10 to 15 miles per hour, Eli elected to have the cruiser remain anchored. And about 10 minutes after he took off, he was overhead the anchored ship. He set up his approach when he was approximately 75 feet astern of Pennsylvania, cut his engine and glided to a landing. The airplane was flying around 40 miles an hour when the hooks engaged the cables, which quickly slowed it to a stop. And Eugene B. Eli landed aboard USS Pennsylvania at 10:01 a.m. I'm looking at a photograph of this frigate with this aeroplane on the front of it. Amazing. So yeah, that's the great story of this very day in 1911. Eugene Burton Eli, one of the great pioneers of landing an aircraft on not even an aircraft carrier as we have now, which have full runways, but on a small frigate that was converted to receive his aeroplane. Amazing. Hal, good morning.
Good morning to you, Anthony. Permission to land.
Permission granted, Hal.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Have you ever flown an aeroplane?
Oh, my goodness. Anthony, I could barely drive a car. An airplane, Jiminy Crickets. But how about yourself? I've been in many airplanes.
Yeah. No, I have had a pilot's license. Yeah, I have flown an airplane.
What?
Yeah.
Oh,
but,
my goodness.
Yeah, I flew my first solo flight at the age of 31, with nobody else in the airplane.
Amazing.
And it was pretty hair-raising because the way they do it in England is you fly circuits, right? So you take off, you turn left or right depending on which way the wind's blowing, and then you fly downwind, and then you fly your base leg, and then you land back on the runway. And they call that a circuit, right?
Sure.
So you fly circuits and you do touch and goes, where you land, then you full power, and then you go back up again. And you fly 6 or 7 or 10 circuits as practice and it takes about 20 minutes to fly the circuit. So if you can do an hour's worth of flying, you've done 3 or 4 circuits. And I will never forget, I landed on a third circuit, and my instructor, I only ever had female instructors. I refused to fly with men because I didn't like their teaching style. Too aggressive for my liking. I'm a mummy's boy,
Sure.
And my teacher, my instructor said, "Stop on the runway. I'm getting out." And she got out and she said, "Do the next one on your own." And that was a real kind of moment. It reminded me of being 3 years old and swimming with an instructor holding my swimwear at the back, and then the instructor letting go of my undercrackers, so I would continue swimming on my own for a few strokes. It was that very same feeling of being set free, and it was because I was in that mode of like doing the circuits. To do one without her, I ended up doing 2 or 3 without her, was amazing. So yeah, that was the first time I flew solo.
That is tremendous. And may I ask, how often do you fly nowadays, or when was the last time you went up and away?
When I had children, I kind of stopped flying because I didn't want to put any risk of them, because there's not as much risk flying as there is driving a car sometimes, but I kind of did it less. I haven't flown in 5 years since I moved to the United States. But in England, I started up again in England, and I had a couple of friends that had share ownerships of airplanes, little airplanes, and so I would go fly. But I never wanted to fly on my own. I always thought that if you go fly in a commercial jet, you don't want there to be one pilot in the front. You always want to feel comfortable knowing there's 2. And so, I did a few flights on my own, obviously, in order for the license training, but I never really enjoyed flying alone.
Gotcha. Yeah, I would, you're a better man than I, Anthony Davis. I would be at a loss. One time, I was shooting something, and I was tasked to into a helicopter, and then the helicopter would get up and take me away. Right. And I went and got into the helicopter, and I closed the door, and the helicopter lifted up, and then the door flew open, and I was kind of holding it, and I was like, is this supposed to happen? And the guy said, oh, yeah, slam it shut, slam it.
It hadn't been latched properly, and you had to pull it closed.
And it was kind of an old helicopter. It was
terrifying.
Yeah, that was a little bit nerve-wracking. But you know what? Maybe one day you can do the Anthony Davis show from in the air.
Yeah, that would be a good idea. I mean, I almost did when I went to Cleveland recently. I very, very nearly had to do it when I was traveling. But it's interesting, isn't it? Some people are very, I was like claustrophobic and scared of heights, and yet I overcame both by learning to fly.
Oh,
and I feel like sometimes you really have to face your fears.
Oh, that puts your feet to the fire.
Have you skydived? Have you ever jumped out of a plane with a parachute?
I have not. How about yourself?
I did 13,500 feet, yeah.
Wow, you're a risk taker. You, as they say here in the States and in the Mountain Dew commercials, you're extreme.
I'm really not. It's so funny. I'm so risk averse. And actually, a girlfriend bought me this parachute jump as a birthday present, and I was devastated. I just was devastated. I did not want to do it. And I have it on video. I watch it back. It was the worst thing I have ever done in my life. I do not recommend it.
Oh my goodness. Okay, noted. Yeah, I would. I would be beside myself. But I would go try it at the mall. You know how you can do skydiving?
Absolutely, that's a very safe space. Yeah, I would definitely enjoy that. But the reason mine was so bad is because I waited till the end of the day. Literally, everybody went ahead of me. And when I eventually got to go, the clouds in England had come over, and we popped through a rain cloud. And it was when we were free falling for 30 seconds, it was like my head was being held underwater. There's the cloud, the water, it was all going up my nose, and it was like being waterboarded.
That sounds horrific.
Mid-air. It was horrific.
Oh, what a terrible experience!
It was the
terrible
worst
experience.
And I have it on video, so I can relive it whenever I want.
Oh my! Like, you must think, is this the end? Like,
I genuinely thought it was. I was like, get me. Can you imagine that happening on land, and then adding in the fact that there's 10,000 feet between you and the earth? It was a disaster.
You're already like rolling the dice, especially when it's your first time. It's like, okay, I guess we're trying this, and then, oh boy, Anthony, I'm glad you're still with us.
Only just. What's coming up on the show today, Hal?
Coming up, we're going to talk a little bit of pop culture. We're going to talk about the new addition to Disney Plus, the movie The Eternals, one of the latest in the Marvel franchise. I'm going to give a little bit of a review. And also, we're going to go to social media and answer one of our wrong answers only questions. Anthony, I'll pose it to you. You're on your deathbed. What are your wrong answers only, please?
I told you I was ill.
Makes sense. Well played, Sir Anthony Davis.
Okay, take care. Hal, thank you so much. That's your pal, Hal. He will be with you in a few minutes' time, taking you into the afternoon here on Backchannel. I'm back tomorrow morning at 9. Have a great day.